Hello, I'm Sarah Gonzalez with the National Grain Feed Association, and I'm here with Ivo Daalder, the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. So, Mr. Daalder, as a global security expert, you're here at NGFA's 26th annual convention to give our members sort of a broad view of the global situation. And you mentioned a lot of crises that have developed over the past year. Can you briefly describe what some of those are?
Well, really the world is facing a lot of crises, starting, of course, in the Middle East, where we have 4 countries, Syria, Libya, Iraq, and Yemen, that are falling apart. There's a lot of violence. There is a disagreement between Shia and Sunni Muslims. There's a disagreement between a young population and an increasingly authoritarian leadership. And we have foreign intervention from the United States, from Turkey, from Russia, and all kinds of other countries. So that is a huge crisis that we're facing. But at the same time, we're also seeing the emergence, in fact, re-emergence, of kind of big power politics, with Russia taking part of Ukraine, with China trying to have its own sphere of influence in the East and South China Seas, and with the acquisition of territory through military force. We have global problems, from an increasing vulnerability of our cyberspace and our infrastructure, and the growing change of climate that is happening as a result of global warming. And then we have an economic crisis. We still really haven't recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. Too many people are without jobs or good jobs. Technological change is changing the way the labor markets are formed, and that leaves a lot of people angry, and a growing populism within our own societies, which we see in our own politics here today.
And you mentioned some factors that are driving these crises. Can you also describe those factors?
Yeah, there are really sort of 3 things that are happening all at the same time. One is this return of big power politics. The United States used to dominate the stage after the Cold War. Russia and China increasingly resent that kind of dominance, and are now willing to stand up to the United States, which itself has become weaker as a result of a decade-long, 15 years long of involvement in war in the Middle East and Afghanistan. So you have this back and forth between major powers about who is up and who is down in a variety of places in the world. The second thing that is happening is that we are seeing in the Middle East, but also in the liberal democracies, an increasing inability to govern. The states in the Middle East are falling apart. Much of the Middle Eastern state system is in crisis, whereas in the United States and in Europe and the international institutions, increasingly we see political paralysis at the federal level and the national level, and an inability to tackle the problems that we face. And as a result, we see a diffusion of power, that more and more states are becoming more and more powerful, and at the same time non-state actors, corporations, global civic movements, and cities are gaining power. Those are both good things, because we can have cities who are trying to deal with the problems confronting their citizens, and corporations that are trying to provide for their consumers. But it's also a negative consequence, with growing terrorism and hackers and drug cartels creating, really in some ways, ruling states, particularly in Latin America.
You mentioned in this absence of effective government that effective change may likely come from the cities, and more of our population is being concentrated in cities. And a lot of our membership have their operations in rural areas, and they thrive there. So what does that mean for them? Is this all negative for them, or?
No, it just means that political power is shifting.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have an impact on what happens in rural areas. It is that the national government is no longer the sole source of policy or regulation. Increasingly, we see states, particularly in the United States, states and municipal authorities taking on the challenges that they confront. They're closer to the people. They're less likely to be divided and polarized between different political parties. They're more likely to focus on what needs to be done for the people, and therefore likely to be more effective.
Sure.
Within rural areas, that means rural political authorities will, and usually at the state and county level, can be more effective. And within cities, it is the citizens and the municipalities that are likely to be more effective. They'll work together with the states, with the federal government, in order to try to address the problems. But the era of having a federal government imposing everything on the people that live in states and cities, I think that era is coming to an end.
think that would be good news for a lot of our members.
Yeah, I think so.
And so after you give a speech like this or a presentation like this, what is the most common question that you get asked?
Oh, it varies, and it depends a little bit on the audience, but the kinds of things one usually hears about, so what about ISIS? Where is terrorism going, and should we be afraid? Secondly, it's about our politics, particularly in the last few months. The politics in our country are demonstrating a level of polarization that we really haven't seen in a very long time, and what can we do about it? And then the third question, in part because I used to be the U.S. ambassador to NATO, tends to be about, is Russia really a threat to Europe?
So what are the answers, brief answers to those questions?
Well, ISIS is a big challenge, but it's mostly a challenge in the region, and it is a function of the disintegration of the state system. We need to continue to do everything we can to defeat them militarily there rather than over here. But they're not an existential threat. They're not a threat to the existence of the United States. They pose a threat to individuals, but not necessarily to the whole state system. On our politics, I'm with most people. I throw my hands up. It's, the voters are in charge, and I think we see a revolt really on the right and the left against the establishment and the political parties, and our political parties need to figure out a way to respond to the anger and discontent that exists. With regard to NATO and Russia, my view is that NATO is still strong enough to prevent Russia from invading any of its territories, and that Mr. Putin, while he has been shown to be willing to take risks, is not taking that risk of a war with the United States and NATO countries.
Okay. Mr. Daalder, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us.